Welcome to my YouTube channel, and in today's tutorial video I will be discussing about Spring security. This is actually going to be 100% theoretical, showing you under the hood how the system works, how the flow works, and then in the next video I will be demonstrating that practically by creating a Spring Boot app and implementing some Spring security setup and showing you the demo how this works. So to begin with, let's get started. Now, in every web application, we mostly have the client and the server side. And you most likely will want to protect your server side because this is actually the part of the system that deals with data and users information and every of these very vital resources that you really want to protect and you want to preserve. So there comes about this concept of who can access some resources, who you want to allow to view some data or some information you have on your system. And we will be using Spring Framework, which is actually one of the very widely used and important framework out there. And I'm talking more directly about Spring Boot. Spring Boot is actually a framework built on the Spring framework. It helps you to build a standalone production-ready application with minimal configuration. So most of the things is being done by this team, very smart team that does most of the configuration and the setup for you. That's why it allows you to build a production-ready application with minimal configuration, and you get that ready as soon as possible. So it has some auto configuration. It has its own embedded server, and then it's opinionated for faster development. Spring Boot is opinionated actually, and it's integrated with some couple of components. We have Spring Data, Spring Security, Spring Cloud, and so many more. But our focus for this discussion is actually talking about the Spring security. So you know what we're building on, and let's dive right into the Spring security framework. Now, Spring security itself is actually a very powerful and customizable authentication process that allow you to control access to your framework. Right now, when you add, all you need if you're building a Spring Boot application and you want to add some Spring security into it, all you need to do is to add the Spring security dependencies. Now, when you add this, it automatically adds some security filter chain to your application. Let me kind of put it to be something like this. So this is our server, this is our client. Now, whenever requests are coming, by default, you have the request just coming in without any interruption. User can access and hit any part of the resources. So with you bringing in Spring security, it automatically adds some kind of security filter chain here. Let me put this out of it. This is actually not out of the box. It's there on the system, right? But for a clearer and easier way to how to can view this, it's something like this. Right, so in here we have some filter chains, right? Some filter chains such that whenever a request comes in, before they get to your control framework, they need access. They need to pass through this filter check, right? Just like some checkpoints before entering the main system, before hitting your resources. So that's what Spring Security offers you. Now, when you add a dependency on your Spring Boot application, when request comes in, it goes through a filter chain, and one of the common one by default is the username password authentication filter. So Spring Boot have a default setup for that, and if you start up your Spring Boot application, it pops up a form where you need to put in a username and password. Your username, the default username is user, and the password, it's usually auto-generated and printed on your terminal. You can copy that and use that to log in, but this can be customized, and then this filter will be overridden if you customize that, so that you can have a more robust filter that is responsible for handling authentication on your system. And that is exactly what I want to talk about in depth in this video tutorial. So to go right in, this is like a pictorial flow on all the processes or all the happenings, events, and the channels this logic passes through. So when request comes in, remember I said we have some security filter chains, right? And one of them is actually the authentication filter. So what the authentication filter does is it checks if the current request has some authentication token. And we have like JWT token, we have basic auth, credentials, and so many authentication credentials the user or you want to set up on your system whenever user try to make requests or access your server, right? So what it does is it's create an authentication object like username and password authentication, and then it calls the authentication manager with this authentication token it created. Okay, so the authentication filter called the authentication manager, and what the authentication manager does is this is actually an instance of provider manager, and what it does is it delegates requests to one or more authentication provider. So we have several authentication provider within the Spring security ecosystem. We have like the DAO authentication provider, we have the JWT authentication provider, and a couple of others. So the authentication manager right here, which is actually an instance of provider manager, delegates jobs to different authentication provider you have on the system, right? So now let me make reference to the authentication provider if that is what the system is configured to work with. So the authentication manager now calls on the DAO authentication provider, which then in turns call on different services. So the DAO authentication services, one of which it calls it the user services. We have the password encoder, and this is how it works. The user services have some couple of methods in it, like gets username, gets user password, get authorities, is account expired, is account log, is credential expired, and one of 7 major function or methods which you can call within the DAO authentication provider. So the user detail service, it fetches you the information about this user, it gets you the user password. Maybe you block this account, you can also get that using the from the user detail service. You can also check if the user is enabled. You know, when the user sign up on your system, you can set it up to user need to verify and then enable the account, and all of that. This can all happen within the user detail service. It's a class that actually provides you with all of this. So now when the user provides you with email and password, right, just like we have set it up when they're trying to access the system. So you get that user and then the password. Now remember, it's always required, it's important to save your password in hash form, right? Don't save the plain password on your system. This is for security purpose. So this password is always hash, and there's no way you could actually know what is in the password. There's no way to kind of get it back at the original text or the original string user was submitted when they created or when they registered the account. So that's where the password encoder now comes in. So the password encoder helps you to hash this password user is providing, right? Remember when the provider the username and password, and it helps you to encode this password, and then you compare that to the user's saved password, right? Now so within this provider, this is within the DaoAuthentication authentication provider, this is where you validate the credentials and return a full authentication object if it's successful, right? So you have to we have to make sure that okay, the user is registered, the user is providing us the right email and password, and when we compare the password using the password encoder, we have a success. Then we return back a fully authenticated object. Now if this is successful, then we store the authentication object in the security context holder right here, right? And then which represents like the security context of the current request, right? Now remember I said HTTP request is very stateless. As soon as a request is completed, the next request doesn't remember who does that. And now this is actually being stored in this security context holder on this very request the user is currently trying to make, right? And if if it's not successful, then we return back, we throw back some kind of authentication exception error with some HTTP status code of 401 or 403. Now 401 is actually unauthorized requests, and 403 is when the user completely doesn't provide the valid authentication. So you return 401 for authorization error, and then 403 for authentication error, right? So that's the difference between these two HTTP status code. Now, what I mean by authorization on authentication is the user is actually a valid user, but the user is trying to access some resources that they are not allowed to. Remember, I said in the user detail service, we have a method for get authority. So from there, you can actually know what are the resources, what this user is authorized to access. So if the user tries to hit or access some unauthorized request, then that is actually where the 401 comes in. But if the user is actually completely not a registered user, not a valid user, the email might not be correct, or the password is not correct, then we're trying to 403 error. Or maybe the user is completely not providing all this this authorization objects, right, like the JWT and username and password in the end of that, then that is where we'll completely return back the 403 error response for the user. Now, let's assume everything is successful, the authorization flow was successfully completed. Then we proceed with the request. We proceed by allowing user to access the appropriate controller or resources they want to access. And that is how, in summary, how the Spring security architecture, that is how the flow works. And this is actually, just like I mentioned, a theoretical explanation of how the flow works. In the next video tutorial section, we'll be showing you a more practical in-depth on how this flow and how that is being implemented. That is all from me. Thank you very much for sticking around. Please subscribe or like or share this video, and so you hit on the notification bell icon so you will be notified when I release the next video tutorial on Spring Boot and programming in general. Thank you.